Welcome to the next workshop of the How to Do Research and Get Published webinar series. Thanks for joining us. Today we'll be focusing on what it takes to get published in an academic journal, with a specific focus on research integrity and ethics. So today we'll be joined by the three of us. First, Jessica Offenberger is a publishing editor on the STM Journal's editorial team. She manages a range of science and medicine journals, working with editors and societies to develop new strategies as well as problem solve. During her time at Sage, she has also worked closely with the author team to create and develop resources to help early career researchers across disciplines better understand the publishing process and how to publish their research. Jessica has a background in project management, marketing, business development, and self-publishing. She holds a Bachelor of Arts in Journalism from Michigan State University and is based in Los Angeles. We're also joined by Adya Misra, an experienced publishing professional with expertise in publication ethics and clinical research. Adya has worked in senior editorial roles at PLOS and PeerJ, bringing together subject-level expertise in molecular biology, medicine, and public health, along with hands-on experience in publication ethics and research integrity principles. Adya has a broad interest in evidence-based research, science communication, and research integrity, all of which have developed via initiatives across various employers in her previous work as an academic researcher. And last, I'm Sean Skarsberg, a marketing manager on the author marketing team at Sage. My primary role is to support authors and reviewers as they move through the publishing process, with a particular focus on targeted resources to provide support at the appropriate time in the publication process. I have a BA in history from Manhattan College and an MA in history from Hunter College, and I'm based out of New York. So today, please submit your questions to us via the Q&A chat at the bottom of your screen. We'll do the best to answer all the questions that we can, but time constraints may not allow us to answer all of them. If you're interested throughout the webinar and you see a question that you particularly like, please do upvote them, because those will be the questions that we start off with. So to get us started today, here's a chart that illustrates the typical author journey, moving from the early stages of securing funding, conducting research, all the way through peer review and publication. Today, we're talking about research integrity and ethics, an area that crosses all of these different stages of the publication process. We encourage you to go back and watch recordings of other topics that we've covered in the series, including how to get grant funding and the role of mentorship.
So let's start with what is research integrity. So at Sage, we really imagine research integrity to encompass the principles of responsible research and evaluation prior to publication. And this includes ethical research, accurate research, transparently reported research, and research that allows replication. So how do we uphold research integrity? Well, we at Sage believe that research integrity is a shared responsibility, and we share this with all of the stakeholders in the scholarly ecosystem. And this includes researchers, research institutions, funders, other academic organizations that take part in research, and of course, journals and publishers. So how do we measure research integrity? For us, it's really the highest standards of research performed. And some of these are included here, such as appropriate and timely ethical approval of study, suitable participant consent, appropriate research design to topic. So for example, if you want to work with human participants, you really should have the approvals and consent that are required to do such research. We also believe in inclusion of appropriate stakeholders in the research. And by this, we really mean that anybody who has been part of the research process, even if they may not meet the traditional authorship criteria, should be included. This could include folks in the community who might be subjects of your research. It could be the lab technician who has done all of the experiments as part of the research, etc. We also believe in transparent reporting of results and results that can be replicated. In addition, as publishers, we measure research integrity in high standards in communicating research via publication. And by this, we really mean that every single research article that we publish should be independently peer-reviewed. All of the contributors are recognized either by authorship or by adding in acknowledgements. We also believe in maintaining the integrity of the academic record. So that means issuing corrections or expressions of concern or other notices to alert readers when there is a problem with an article, or maybe an update to the record that must be made transparently available to the readers. We also participate in cross-industry initiatives on open access, open science, and transparent peer review. So how do we uphold research integrity? And for us as a publisher, this is really by maintaining an accurate scholarly record. Firstly, we have to ensure the accuracy of content at publication, and we do this largely by peer review and internal checks as a publisher. We also want to ensure that all errors and omissions are corrected promptly and transparently and as quickly as possible. So if an author notices that there was a typo that makes reading of the article very difficult, we will try and change this as quickly as possible. And of course, this includes more serious errors and omissions. We also want to make sure that unreliable research is appropriately marked for readers. So for example, if we have published something that may have passed peer review, but upon further reflection may or may not be reliable, we will appropriately mark that for our readers so that readers know that this is probably something we shouldn't rely upon and wait for an investigation to be completed. We also make sure that authors remain accountable for everything that they publish. So the publication journey doesn't finish upon publication. We believe in post-publication peer review, asking questions or clarifications as necessary to make the record as transparent and accurate as possible. And lastly, we want to make sure that anything that is seriously flawed or harmful is highlighted as quickly as possibly to alert readers that they shouldn't rely on that research. So to give you a quick overview of the research integrity issues that are currently being faced within scholarly publishing, you can see that there's a lot of things going on. We used to have very bog standard issues such as plagiarism, authorship disputes, but we're now increasingly starting to see issues around submission farms or paper mills, duplicate submissions or duplicate publications, and of course, issues around fraudulent accounts, fraudulent identities, fraudulent data. And this is becoming an increasingly difficult issue to tackle as an industry.
So what role do authors play in research integrity? The researchers are at the crux of upholding these principles and making sure that everything goes smoothly from the time you bring this idea to the table and come up with your hypotheses all the way through data collection, seeking approval for the type of study that you're wanting to conduct, all the way to actually writing and publishing your manuscript, and then being transparent and disclosing any possible conflicts or concerns that come up post-publication. So authorship. So this is something you'll want to discuss right at the beginning of your research project. So right as you're discussing who will be part of it. As Adia mentioned, thinking about everyone who is involved in the project should be acknowledged, but they may or may not meet those authorship criteria. So be sure to take a look at some of the guidelines we put together. We actually have a great webinar specifically on authorship and authorship criteria, so I encourage you to go back and watch that. You'll want to discuss upfront who will be in the author group and outline those clear roles for everyone collaborating. Also, as Adia mentioned, if you are working with any human subjects or your research includes participants, maybe even some kind of secondary data analysis, you will likely need to seek some sort of approval to do the research. Most people will do this through their institutional review board or IRB and seek approval through that. There are other organizations and entities that even if you're not affiliated with an institution that you can go to seek this type of approval. So be sure you're making sure to gather all of those appropriate approvals ahead of time. You may even need to get special permission So some type of research such as field work in other countries, maybe on rare indigenous plants like we talk about here, or archaeological specimens, requires special permissions. You'll want to be securing those, seeking those as early as possible in your research process so that you don't encounter any barriers as you go to analyze or collect data. Speaking of data, you'll want to keep all accurate records of the data that you've collected, analyzed, and processed. Keep those files, back those up. You can store them on external hard drives or multiple computers, but you'll want to protect that data too. Some data might need to be protected, especially if you're dealing with human participants or research study participants. So keep privacy in mind as you're saving this data. Some journals might require you to deposit that data in a repository. The journal guidelines will have a clear outline of whether that data sharing is required or recommended. So you can take a look at the journal author guidelines there. This can vary by publisher as well. But that data might be requested from you as the article is going through peer review. And it might just be the editor or associate editor that's requesting that just to verify what you've submitted in your manuscript, but it's good to have accurate records on hand in case that gets called into question. And that could even be post-publication, not even during the peer review process. With the writing process, we have a whole great webinar on how to write a manuscript, but one of the things that we emphasize is ensuring that you're creating unique text and not plagiarizing or even recycling previously published text. So you'll want to make sure you're citing all of your work appropriately. Make sure to give credit where credit is due, even if it's your own work that you're previously citing. If at all possible, please do not use AI-based tools for research writing. You want to make sure that it's your own voice, your own words that are coming through in this process. Same thing with images. If you're generating any images, we have another great webinar from May on image integrity. Ensure that these are high quality and not modified. And if you are making any edits, like we talk about in that webinar, so maybe very slight modifications of adjusting the brightness in an image, make sure to track all of that and note those changes so you have the originals on file if they are requested from the journal. If you have any participant images, so of human subjects, make sure you have consent forms. Make sure they have given permission to be published in the journal. Some journals will actually request those forms to make sure you have those on hand when you submit. That won't be stored to make sure that we're abiding by privacy laws, but it is important that you have those consent forms on file, especially if you're using any human subjects. The journal author guidelines are also a great place for this to see what type of anonymization might be required in addition to having that consent for publication, as that does vary journal by journal. We also encourage you to pre-register your study protocols. So this could be publishing your study protocol either as a preprint or as a registered report. More and more journals now are accepting registered reports where that stage 1, that study protocol outlining the hypothesis and the methodology undergoes peer review first and is uploaded to a preprint server or other repository. And then you go back and collect the data, and that ultimately gets converted into a final manuscript that gets peer reviewed. You can also register your clinical trial or systematic review or meta-analysis. That helps aid in transparency. So that could be anything related to these type of article types. The Equator Network is a fantastic resource for guidelines. I highly encourage you to check out the Equator Reporting Guidelines Network for guidance if you haven't already. Many of you are probably familiar with this resource, but it's a really great place for checklists when you're conducting your research and putting together your manuscripts. And our editors use these guidelines as well. They use it as a checklist upon submission to make sure all of the appropriate elements are included when you go ahead and submit your manuscript. As I had talked about on the last slide, if you have the permission, so this is where we were talking about there might be some privacy concerns, but if you have the permission to upload your data and or the journal requires it, you can upload your data to a repository. And then holding on to that primary or secondary data in case there are any questions or further work or investigations that might be needed. Having a backup of that, have that original data on hand in all of those forms on hand in case any of your work is called into question. So as you're getting ready to submit, there's always the question of what are the best practices in actually submitting to a journal, and how do I follow these as authors, upholding that research integrity. So there's an uptick of what we call predatory publishers, and so you want to check the legitimacy of the journal you are submitting to. If you go to the journal webpage, the journal homepage, you'll be looking for things like, are there society affiliations, publisher affiliations? Are the guidelines clear and transparent? Is it clear that there are fees or no fees to submit? Maybe there's an article processing charge. Is there an outline of the peer review process? You want to be submitting to peer-reviewed journals. And so going through and making sure that the journal is legitimate is something worth checking. You can also ask your colleagues and others in your network, hey, is this a journal you're familiar with? Do you read it regularly? There's also some great resources out there like thinkcheckandsubmit.org, so you can check the journal there. Look at various indexing platforms like the Directory of Open Access Journals, Scopus, Web of Science. There are many different indexes out there that you can use to check the legitimacy of your journal that you're interested in submitting to. And there's also Retraction Watch to see if your journal has been hijacked. Do not collaborate with any third-party journal agents who promise guaranteed acceptance. As we're all aware, submitting to a journal does not guarantee acceptance. There are many, many different reasons for rejection. And even as your journal comes back for revision, or even as your journal article comes back with a request for revisions, it still does not guarantee acceptance until you receive that final acceptance letter. You will also want to be careful not to cite previously retracted publications in your reference list. If an article has been retracted, you will see that very clearly stated, very clearly displayed on the journal article itself. Even if you or your institution does not have a subscription to that particular journal, it will be made very clear when you land on that page if it has been retracted. Or as Adia mentioned, maybe there's an expression of concern that's being investigated at that time. Talking about your reference list. When you submit your manuscript, you're looking at what is the current literature available in your field, what supports, or what you're citing anything that is relevant. You want to give credit where credit is due. But let's say you receive a request from the reviewer or the editor to cite specific publications during the peer review process. If you have concerns that these might not be quite the right fit for your publication, maybe it doesn't add to your research, and you have concerns about that, I encourage you to reach out to the publisher in question just to talk through that to make sure there's nothing fishy going on here. We want to make sure that any citations in that reference list do adequately reflect the research that you're putting together and ultimately trying to publish. And then while many journals embrace a variety of different peer review practices, so it could be a single anonymous, double anonymous, or open or transparent peer review, especially for those where the peer review style is single or double anonymous, meaning that like in double anonymous peer review, the reviewers do not know the authors and the authors do not know the peer reviewers. If there are any breaches of confidentiality, or you have concerns that something might not be quite right during this peer review process, I encourage you to also reach out to the publisher or the editorial office to talk through those concerns. One of, Adia will speak on this a little later in our presentation, but one of the key elements of being a peer reviewer for a journal is maintaining that confidentiality. You're reviewing these manuscripts before they are even published. So keeping that to yourself as you're going through the peer review process and providing feedback. I do want to cover some of the things that you might be outlining in your article that are crucial for making these sorts of disclosures and acknowledgements. So I feel like we cannot emphasize this enough. Someone does not count as an author if they have participated solely in the acquisition of funding, collection of data, or general supervision of the research group. But if there are contributors who have done one or more of these things, but do not meet the full criteria for authorship, then they can and should be listed in the acknowledgement section. We want to make sure people receive credit where credit is due. I feel like I'm saying that a lot this webinar, but that's very important and key to research integrity. Related to that, the inclusion of detailed ethics approval and informed consent statements is a fundamental requirement, especially in the biomedical research articles. So at the initial review stage, there is a check to see if appropriate ethics approval and informed consent statements have been provided by you, the author. If these are missing or incomplete, the manuscript will be sent back to the authors and the manuscript will not move forward into peer review, and additional information might be requested. So this will delay the peer review process, which ultimately delays your manuscript. So it's in your best interest to make sure your manuscript is as complete as possible when you go to submit. So providing this information at submission reduces the likelihood of a manuscript being sent back or spending more time in revision. You'll want to state if you have any conflicts of interest or funding to declare. Even if you have nothing to disclose, document that as well. You'll see that in many journals, it will say conflicts of interest, none. Funding disclosures, none. That is also important and something that's worth the transparency and part of research integrity. Medical fields have a few different and additional requirements. So it's important to check the journal submission guidelines to make sure that you aren't missing anything. And then you'll provide any additional relevant reporting checklists for your study type and a copy of that completed checklist with your submission. That is very helpful. In terms of the references, as we talked about, you'll want to list all articles cited within the paper, again, giving credit where credit is due, and it should follow the style of the journal. So go back to the journal author guidelines and see what style the journal follows. Harvard, Vancouver, APA, AMA, those are common styles used. And other styles can be ACS, ASA, Chicago, CSE. So double check what style is being used. And then if you're submitting a paper directly from a preprint server, such as Sage Advance, this is becoming more and more common nowadays. Make sure the formatting and the file type is correct and properly anonymized where appropriate. So looking at the type of peer review that the journal uses and see what any type of anonymization might be required before you submit. talked about this a little bit. We often hear people ask if they are more likely to have their paper accepted if they cite literature previously published in the journal. The short answer is no, this is not necessarily true. The bigger issue at hand is that the reference list should be comprehensive and relevant. It's always good to have recent literature within the last 5 years be a good portion of the references. Reviewers will get concerned if there aren't recent references, especially when they do exist. So it's good to reference other papers published in the journal to which you would like to submit, as that shows your research is somewhat related to that journal's aims and scopes, but of course it doesn't need to be your entire reference list. And this, I want to emphasize that this is not compulsory and will not necessarily increase the chances of your article being published. We take great care to advise our editors and reviewers not to make judgments about a paper based on a personal, financial, or intellectual bias or any other considerations. The quality of your research and the written presentation of the paper are paramount. And our editors are committed to maintaining and promoting consistent ethical policies for their journal, hence why we're focused on this presentation today. The last thing worth noting is any supporting materials. So most journals have word limits and figure limits. So supporting materials, supplemental material might come in handy. This can be a great way to illustrate your research. Video and audio files cannot be printed in the journal, but are really great interactive elements to host alongside your article online. They also increase the visibility of your article. But again, if you have any visual elements, make sure you're seeking all of the appropriate permissions, or maybe you need a consent form if someone's being interviewed in that video. So thinking back to any permissions required. We have a great webinar coming up next month on copyright and permissions. We talk a little bit about disclosures. Most often these are displayed. You'll be asked this upon submission, and there's fields in the submission portal for this, but some journals will ask for this on the title page or cover letter. So I wanted to give some examples here. We've often been asked, can you please provide some examples? So, as discussed, no conflict of interest in the submission of this manuscript. Where was the study funded? It was funded by the X department of the University of XYZ. Or what organization or grant. You might even be asked to provide the grant number. Talk about best practices. You want to only submit to one journal at a time. So some authors think, oh, if I submit it to 5 journals at a time, it will increase my my chances of acceptance. This is not true and not best practice. So really take the time up front to pick the right journal that you want to submit to. And there's a great webinar on that as well to go back and watch. But if you do your homework up front, that will save you time and ultimately reduce the amount of time or potential journals that you need to submit to in the future, but only submit to one journal at a time. Some journals might require you to disclose this upon submission, whether that's in the cover letter or as a checkbox in the submission process. So you're as an author, you're asserting that this is original research developed by you, and it has not been published previously, nor is it under consideration for publication elsewhere in whole or in part. Some people ask, is it okay if I published my conference abstract, like an abstract in a conference, or that's typically okay. Of course, there's some nuances around that, but that's not considered previously published. Some people will come to us and say, hey, can I use my manuscript in my dissertation or thesis? That is acceptable. Again, we'll be talking about that in next month's webinar, but you do want to assert that this has not been published elsewhere. If it was posted in a repository or on a preprint server, you'll want to provide that link upon submission. That will not go through to peer review. Obviously, that could compromise the anonymity of the article, but it is helpful if and when that article is accepted so that the preprint server can link to the final published version. You'll want to disclose as we keep focusing on if you have received all permissions and approvals from your IRB. You might be asked to submit a copy of that. And it's also good to disclose, maybe this is an invited contribution. So some journals will reach out to you and ask that you submit an invited commentary, an invited review. Maybe you were invited for a special issue. Disclosing that is also something worth doing. So these are just a handful of examples that you'll want to disclose upon submission when you go to submit to a journal. There can be many more items that you may need to disclose. At the end of the day, transparency is key. If you have any doubts, reach out to your editorial team, reach out to the publisher, and we're happy to provide some feedback there if you have any doubts, but transparency is key.
So I think we really ask a lot of questions from the authors, but really our peer reviewers are playing such a crucial role in upholding research integrity. It's really important to highlight that. And of course, authors will often act as reviewers. So there are lots of common themes in which we expect our authors and reviewers to help us maintain research integrity in publishing. So the first thing we really ask our reviewers is to highlight if they've been asked to review a manuscript that is conceptually poor or flawed. This should be really flagged up to the editor. Please don't feel like you have to review it, even if you think it should never see the light of day. You should really flag that to the editor because it's your expertise that has been asked for by the editor and they are really relying on it. And secondly, really raise concerns if you see something suspicious or that's ethically questionable when you are receiving these invites. If you see it in an abstract, you should raise it. If you see the full manuscript, you should be raising this as a concern. Editors are experts in their field, but they always rely on reviewers to raise the nuances of specific study designs. So we really want of course, if the authors have been unable to provide information, it may look suspicious, but nonetheless, concerns should be raised so that we can investigate them appropriately and avoid publishing something that might be unethical. We also ask reviewers to contact the editor if you've seen a similar study submitted elsewhere. Chances are, if it is a really small research area and authors are, as Jess mentioned earlier, submitting to multiple journals so that they can get a quicker review response, we really expect reviewers to tell us if they are being invited to review those studies at other journals. It is unethical to submit the same study elsewhere. It wastes everybody's time. And often we will have wasted 6 or 7 people's time just doing peer review without thinking about production and other folks that are involved in the publishing process. So I really encourage authors to not do that. I understand that review times are quite long, especially at the minute, but we have to remember that we are still wasting people's time as volunteers when we submit similar studies in multiple places. And it really does cause concerns about other aspects of your study when you do that. We also ask reviewers to contact either the editor or the publisher directly if you have concerns about text recycling or plagiarism, or the use of artificial intelligence tools or image manipulation. Again, we really rely on the reviewer's expertise. Of course, we rely on our authors to make sure that they're not doing any of those things. But in case that does happen, we really rely on the reviewers to flag that up so that we can, again, investigate and work with the authors to either correct or deal with it appropriately. We also ask our reviewers to contact the editor if the data reported by the authors has been used without permission. Now, sometimes this happens completely by mistake. Sometimes data permissions aren't clear, and sometimes we just don't have enough information to know whether permission would be required. If it's available on the internet, sometimes it's reasonable to assume that it is available in the public domain. But we should remember that a lot of these data sets do require permission, so we really ask reviewers to keep an eye out if we see authors publishing data without permission, it can cause problems after publication. And we really don't want to have those sorts of issues for authors or indeed our editors. So prevention really is better than cure here. And we also asked our reviewers to flag if there are data that don't even appear plausible or might be fabricated. And this is happening on an increasing scale. So we really ask our reviewers to keep an eye out and make sure that the data reported in a manuscript is correct and accurate as far as they can tell. Lastly, we also ask reviewers to recuse themselves from the process if they find out that they know the authors or understand that even if it is a double anonymized journal, it is a manuscript about a topic that they may feel conflicted about. So it might be around your faith, around the institution or your geographical location. There are all sorts of competing interests. So we really ask reviewers to try and be as objective as possible and remove themselves from the process if they feel they can't be fair and objective. Continuing on from our reviewers' expectations from our peer reviewers, I think we've touched on some of this before, but we really expect our reviewers to maintain confidentiality of the peer review process. And this is really independent of the peer review model, single anonymized or double anonymized. We really don't want reviewers to be contacting authors outside of the peer review submission system. This can really cause problems for the authors who might feel pressured in responding to your comments officially and also unofficially, and we really encourage people not to do this. We are also increasingly asking reviewers to not use artificial intelligence tools or large language models to generate review reports. And there are many reasons for this, but mainly these tools cannot replicate your expertise. So if you have subject expertise, you are able to critically evaluate a manuscript in your own words, which a tool cannot do. It just can't do it. We've tried it. Lots of people have done lots of research on it this year. It will never be able to replicate your mind. It will be able to give you a superficial review report, which the editor may not find very helpful. And it's really wasted a lot of time to just generate something that may not be beneficial for the publishing community. We also ask reviewers not to use authors' research to advance their own research agenda. And we say this because sometimes people don't realize that they are perhaps acting in a way that may not be beneficial to the author. As reviewers, we really expect that you are here to provide helpful, constructive feedback to the authors, not to stop their research from being published. So we really ask reviewers, if you feel that your objectivity is compromised, please don't review the research. And lastly, I also want to mention that I think there have been quite a few questions about this in the chat already, but we ask reviewers not to request unnecessary citations to their own work or other individuals' work. It might be the editor, it might be somebody else in their institution. Again, this really puts the author in a difficult position because they don't know if they need to definitely add citations for publication. It really artificially inflates your impact, which is really unethical, and we really ask reviewers to not do this. And if they do ask authors to cite any research, please provide a justification so that authors understand that it's not for your personal gain. And again, I guess this is quite understandable. We always ask reviewers to maintain a respectful tone. This is a collaborative process. Authors are sometimes reviewers and vice versa. So we really need to work together during peer review and really respect each other's expertise.
Thank you. Those are great points, Adia, and worth mentioning over and over again. Just a reminder for everyone here that we have a great resource. We have great resources available on our SAGE Journal Author Gateway and our SAGE Reviewer Gateway. So we have guides on how to get published, how to conduct peer review, and answers to common questions. We have reminders on which version of your paper you can share, where and when. And we also have translated materials into Chinese on our Chinese Author Gateway. For anyone that might need that. So I encourage you to go and reference these resources. Coming up next, as I alluded to earlier, our next webinar is on October 11th, where we're going to be talking about copyright permissions and author reuse. This can be a really complex subject. So we'll be focusing on permissions, the type of licenses, and how you can reuse these type of materials. So thinking about which version of your article you can share, as well as when you need to secure any permissions from any third-party content. So tune in next month for that. You can see here our schedule through the remainder of the year, including how to write a literature review, and how to create a research agenda and develop your personal academic brand. Our 2024 schedule will be released here shortly, so stay tuned on that. So now we're going to end our presentation here. We've seen a great number of questions and comments come into the chat. So without further ado, let's dive into some questions.
Terrific, thank you. And thank you both so much for answering all of the, or running through the presentation today. So if everybody is interested in submitting questions, please feel free to do so in the Q&A. You'll see a bunch that are in there already, and do upvote any that you are particularly interested in. So to kick things off, I have the first question. So when working on a case study, do you need to get permission from the company ahead of publishing in an academic journal? Or do you only need to note the secondary data since it's in the public domain? Adia and Jessica, I'll pass it over to you.
I think I mentioned this already. Just because it's on the internet doesn't mean it's in the public domain. So it's always a safer option to seek permission. Of course, if it clearly says that there are no permissions associated with the data set and you should be able to use it, but definitely cite the original resource. But I would say, to be on the safe side, send the data owners or processors an email and ask, what are the requirements for using this data?
Well said.
All right, fantastic. Thank you, Adia. So the next question we have here, we have a lot of questions coming through about AI. So this one is just generally, should AI be used in the research process?
Adia, do you want to jump in or shall I?
Yeah,
I'm happy
to answer. I think I can just say that it's really hard to say what we, as publishers, we can't dictate what researchers use. It's very new technology. We're learning something new about this technology every week. There are some tools that are going to benefit researchers in the long term. I don't see them yet. I don't see something that's reliable, valuable just yet, but I think it will come. Obviously, people who are actively working on this technology are experts in this, and they should be the places where we ask these questions. But I think it's inevitable that it will be part of the research process. Go ahead, Jess, if you wanted to add something.
Yeah, and I just wanted to add, I know some people have found these tools helpful with phrasing sentences and saving time in that capacity, or helping with language barriers. But one of the main concerns is that AI, as Adia mentioned, AI is not the subject expert. They did not conduct their research. You conducted the research as an author. So we, as Adia mentioned, I think it will become more prevalent. We cannot dictate what tools authors use or don't use. We don't encourage the use of it. If you do use it, it's good to disclose and be transparent and in what capacity you did use it. So maybe it's just to help with some of those language barriers, and always double check what's coming out of that. Don't paste it blindly into the manuscript, because you are the subject expert. You know your data and what research you conducted. So I would say tread lightly if we want to pause there. Anything else that you wanted to add, Adia?
I think this actually is a really nice segue into kind of a follow-up question on that. And you've kind of, you've touched on the surface a little bit, but I'm curious if you could talk about the drawbacks of using AI in research, and exactly if you have any specifics there.
I can give you a little bit, and then Jess, you can take over. I just wanted to mention that current tools that we have are mainly around text and image generation. So there are tools that will generate text for you, new content for you. I see some of these advertised as content creation tools. And I think the biggest thing I would say for researchers is that these tools can create what are called hallucinations. So the tool can collect a lot of information from the internet and almost fabricate something new that doesn't exist. We've seen several high-profile cases where, a legal researcher found all these legal case studies for their brief, but they didn't exist. So I think that's a really big risk for researchers, just around factual accuracy. So again, as Jess said, that if you want to use these tools, please be really careful and double check what you find there, because they're not yet fully accurate.
I honestly don't have more to add to that. I think you captured that quite well, Adia. So I'm going to leave it there. Well said.
Great, thank you both. We have a number of questions coming in about hijacked journals. I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about that, what it means and what it means for authors.
Yeah, I can start us out on that. So typically what we see with the hijacked journal is imitation emails. So let's say you have a legitimate journal. It's backed by a society or it's backed by a publisher. But then let's say the email was compromised and you might get a request to pay an article processing charge and it is not legitimate. So when we talk about this and how you can avoid that, the number one thing we'll be looking at the journal author guidelines and saying, when will you be expected to pay something? If let's say there is an article processing charge or a page charge fee or a submission fee, that should be very clearly outlined on the author guidelines page. And it will also state when you will be expected to pay that. So article processing charges are not collected until an article is accepted and ready to be processed for publication. These go back to some of the IT best practices of how to identify fraudulent emails. Look to see, does the email match what is on the journal website? Does the domain name match up? Maybe it's misaligned. Maybe there's a few grammar or spelling errors that come in that would not necessarily normally be there. If you hover over hyperlinks, does it go to the publisher page, like the portal to collect the payment information? Does it go to the society page if it's a self-published journal? Hover over those hyperlinks and do your due diligence before you click and start transferring money. And are there contact details in that? If you have any doubts about an email and the validity of that, go back to those journal author guidelines and go back, contact the journal editorial office directly or the publisher directly and ask, is this a legitimate request? I'm going to pause there. Adia, is there anything that you want to add or mention?
I just wanted to mention hijacked journals because a few people have asked questions there, and I think it's a relatively new term that we've come up with as an industry. So these are basically journals that look very much like well-known journals, but they're not. So they will have a tiny, tiny word change that will confuse people if they're looking very quickly. They will have well-known researchers on their editorial board, but that may not be real. So there is a list of hijacked journals on the Retraction Watch website, so please do check it if you are looking at submitting your work to a journal, because the hijacked journal, it works exactly like a predatory journal, except it's done a little bit more smart work to look like a little bit more legitimate.
Great, thank you both.
If I can add one other thing. Again, that's looking back. So even if the indices are listed, so let's say on that copycat journal, that hijack journal page, maybe they list the indexes that they're a part of, go to those websites, go to Scopus, go to the directory of open access journals, go to Web of Science, ask your librarian at your institution to double check if you have any concerns. Maybe it just seems a little too close. So just wanted to make mention of that.
Great, thank you. So let's move on to the next question. And this is again about AI. Do you think the use of AI-based tools for research and writing will become more commonly accepted and or seen over time?
I think the short answer is perhaps, and that's not the answer that I think everyone wants to hear, but I think it will remain to be seen, and how they're integrated into the academic publishing world. I don't think we can speak to whether they'll be commonly accepted. I think there's still many concerns, as we've been talking about with the quality and the output and the validity of it. So I'm hesitant to comment on that. But as Adia mentioned, I do think they will be used more in some capacity. What that will be is remain to be seen. Adia, anything you want to mention or add in there?
No, I think now I'm thinking really in the future, really in the future, it might be a little bit like a Google search engine where, we might be using it in that capacity to generate information and then double checking if it's valid. But I really don't see much more than that for AI-based tools in this capacity. But again, we don't know what technological advancements will look like in even next year. So it remains to be seen.
Thank you. So now we talked about hijack journals, and I think we have another question about predatory journals. There's a lot of similarities in treatment and how to avoid it, but I'm wondering if you have any tips for detecting predatory journals, and is there anything else outside of what you've spoken about for hijack journals worth mentioning?
I guess we mentioned it in the presentation. There's a website called Think, Check, Submit. So it's really about when you're looking at a journal, just put that journal name into that website, and it might be able to help you understand. There's like a checklist that you can look at to see if this information is present. It's likely to be a legitimate journal. So there's no, as much as we would like to create a list, there is no list that says that these journals are terrible. Or these are the journals that you shouldn't be submitting to, but there are ways of determining which journal is most trustworthy than the other.
Yeah, and just to go back to some of our earlier tips, look for that branding, look for publishers, logos, links to those publishers, make sure the hyperlinks actually click through to those society websites or publisher websites, looking for transparency in the author guidelines. Are the hyperlinks going to the correct pages? Checking out the editorial board. Are they look on LinkedIn or other networks or other research platforms to verify the identity of these researchers that are serving on editorial boards, and you can take a look at their publicly listed CV or profile. So we've got some great Sage Perspectives blogs that we can circulate following the webinar on how to avoid predatory publishers and things that you can look for. We've got some great resources there.
Thank you, Jessica. So one more question. So why shouldn't you submit a manuscript to multiple journals? And especially thinking about more specifically about a manuscript that has multiple co-authors, why shouldn't each of these co-authors go on to submit somewhere different?
I think that goes back to Adia's point that it's really a waste of time for all of these journals. So each journal will send out invites to peer reviewers to peer review this manuscript. So best practice is that 2 external peer reviewers are reviewing a manuscript that comes through for submission, sometimes more. Sometimes that can be 3 or more peer reviewers. And then if you're sending that out to 5 or 6 journals, that's quite a lot of people. And it could be you that gets the invite from multiple journals to review this manuscript, and that might get flagged. going back to how to choose a journal, really it is in your best, from your perspective, it's in your best interest to really take the time to do your homework up front and think about the best journal to submit to. Thinking about readership, who is the readership of that journal? A lot of authors say, oh, I want to publish in a high impact factor journal. Well, just because your article gets published in a high impact factor journal does not necessarily mean that your article will receive all of the citations. So you want to think about your research and who you are trying to target, but then also what journals are relevant in your discipline and your field. What journals do you and your coworkers read? Who are you trying to reach? There are so many factors that go into this. And if you submit to 5 journals and you get accepted by one of those, it still may not be the right home. And this is across all publishers, that the best practice is one journal at a time, regardless of the number of authors. So that's why when you're forming your author group up front, identifying what are the roles that each of you as authors have? Who will be the corresponding author? That corresponding author is responsible for maintaining all of that communication with the journal. That one person should be the one facilitating that process. So we submit to this journal first. This is our #1 journal. This is the best fit. If it gets accepted, great. If it gets rejected, what was the next journal on our list? Let's go to that one. And they're maintaining all of that communication. I've jumped around to a couple different points here. Sorry about that. But Adia, is there anything that you want to add from best practice perspective?
I guess just basically to emphasize your point about waste, we sometimes see articles by mistake get published in 2 different journals because they were submitted to 2 different journals, and then one has to be retracted. I don't think any authors want that. So really, it's important that all authors agree about where we're submitting and try not to submit to too many journals at the same time.
Fantastic, thank you. I think we have got time, if we're quick, with one other question. I want to address this one. So this is a question specifically about the continuation of PhD research, or continuing to use your PhD research in further publications. And this is a question, essentially, is this self-plagiarism? How does this fit into the overall research integrity conversation?
So the key, again, I feel like we've been saying this, is transparency. So disclose that this manuscript was part of your dissertation or thesis or PhD research. If your dissertation has already been uploaded to an institutional repository, be sure to cite yourself. So again, giving credit where credit is due, even if it's your words, using those citations in quotes. I'm hesitant to go into too much more detail than this because it really is on a case-by-case basis on how, when, and where that dissertation or research had been uploaded previously. So we don't want to give too much advice here. But that transparency, disclose that it was a dissertation, disclose that in your cover letter, disclose that in your manuscript, and cite that as necessary. Adia, anything to add there?
No, I agree with that. I think it's really important to cite anything that you've done previously and build upon.
Thank you both so much. And I think now we are at the end of our presentation for today. A huge thank you to Jessica and Adia for going through everything and answering everybody's questions. I would like to flag before we close out, just a reminder of some of our upcoming webinars. So as Jessica mentioned at the onset, we have one a month for the rest of the year from the How to Do Research and Get Published series. So next month will be about copyright permissions and author reuse. November about literature reviews. And December, we will have one about the research agenda and your personal brand. In addition, we're also running the How to Be a Peer Reviewer webinar. The next one will be happening October 18th. This webinar will be at a time conducive for researchers in South Asia. So if you're in the area and want to join a live webinar, definitely would recommend that one. We have another one happening November 8th. This will be at a time more conducive for researchers in the US, UK time zones and all of the surrounding areas. So please do feel free to join. And thank you for coming today, and we hope to see you next time. Take care.